All right, so my name is Shayla Berner, and my topic is how to build language and literacy support for EAL students in the early years. So, just to go over some of the topics that I'm going to be covering during this time, I'm going to start with literacy development, which is just how students go through different stages as they learn a new language, and how it's important for teachers to understand these stages and to be able to offer language support in each one. After that, we're going to move into learning about play-based learning and what exactly that is and what that looks like in a classroom and the benefits for EAL students. I'm also going to talk about communicative benefits and how play-based learning is largely focused on imagination, communication, and language. And then we're going to kind of go through a little activity that goes through exploration stations and how you can build on student interest and build stations to promote play-based learning. I'm also going to discuss the importance of home languages and how we can communicate the importance of that to parents and families. Next, we're going to go through the role of the teacher and just how they can help students and support them in play-based classrooms, and as well as cultural awareness and just the importance of making sure that that's always something we're considering in our classrooms. And to finish off, I'm just going to kind of talk about the why and talk about the research and how students are coming into school with fewer literacy skills and what schools are kind of doing to address that. So my name is Shayla Berner. Like I said, I went to school in Assiniboia, Saskatchewan, so which is just a small little farming community. I graduated with about 40 people that I kind of started kindergarten with. And after that, I went to the University of Regina where I took my elementary education. After that, I got my first teaching job, which was in a K to 2 classroom in Southeast Cornerstone School Division. And it was in Pangman. So I had about approximately 20 kids in my class every year, and I was there for 7 years. I didn't teach any EAL students during this time, but I wanted to further my education because I knew at some point I would be teaching EAL students, and I knew it was something that I didn't know a lot about. So that led me to apply to the post-degree certificate in teaching English as an additional language through the University of Saskatchewan, sorry. So I completed that, and I'm currently taking my master's through the University of Calgary in early childhood education and supporting children's mental health. And I actually moved to Cornack this year, so I am teaching grade 8 right now in Cornack, which is just, again, a little small farming community around Assiniboia. And next year, I'm going to be teaching pre-kindergarten and kindergarten. So that's just kind of my background a little bit. And now I'm just going to kind of go into the rest of my presentation. So this presentation focuses on the primary age group. So this is children who are entering school for the first time and have to navigate a new classroom, environment, structure, and language. So this is kids who are 3, 4, and 5 years old. Over the course of this presentation, I'm going to talk about how to support these children, how play-based learning can support language learning, and the importance of cultural awareness. So the first topic that I'm going to discuss is literacy development and supporting EAL students in developing language skills. So the research shows that students are coming into kindergarten with fewer and fewer literacy skills. We are seeing this in the early years evaluation, which is, for those of you that don't know, it's a evaluation for kindergarten students. It's taken in approximately November, and it assesses all sorts of skills that are basically looking for readiness for grade 1. So you're looking at fine motor skills, you're looking at gross motor skills. Some of them include holding a book and holding it the right way, knowing your numbers, your letters, being able to balance on one foot, like all kind, it like looks at a variety of different skills. And we are seeing students who are just every year, their scores are lower and lower. And I even saw that in my 7 years of doing this and just in the data throughout the school division. And it's kind of across Saskatchewan. So this is a continuous problem that we're seeing. And because of that, there's a lot more pre-K programs now that are kind of allowing students to come into school earlier so we can start building these skills at an earlier age. Strong skills in the first language act as a bridge, both for language development and for conceptual development in the new language. So it's important that parents know that developing these literacy skills in their first language is going to transfer over into any other language that they learn. So two important things for literacy development are number one, the environment. So students need a safe learning environment where they are free to make mistakes and experiment with language and literacy. If they don't feel safe with the people they're around and the space that they're in, they're not going to feel comfortable to experiment with language and try new things. So it's important that we're creating this safe environment. And the second thing is representation. So students need to feel like they belong and that they are represented within both the environment and the content being learned. And this is one of our responsibilities as a primary teacher. So for example, in pre-K, you're constantly bringing culture into the classroom. You are putting one common thing that teachers do is they put up family pictures and just find different ways that to make sure that students feel that they belong where they are. The strategies for learning English. So this is generally the sequence in which children employ these strategies. They are interrelated and are not necessarily developed or used in a strictly linear fashion. So this means that even though it says step one, step two, step three, that doesn't mean that once students go through step one that they're done with that step. They are constantly moving forward and backwards through these steps, and that's an important thing for teachers to understand. So step one, students are using their first language. After that, students often go through a silent period where they're not speaking. And this is a time when a lot of teachers who aren't familiar with this panic and they think that they're not learning, they're not trying, but that's not necessarily the case. Even when they're being silent, they're still observing and listening. And when they feel comfortable, they might try to speak new words or they might go back and start using their first language. And that's perfectly fine too, because they're still learning literacy no matter what language they're using. Step three, using headlines and learned phrases. So this might mean like what they say might not have anything to do with what you're talking about, but they're using learned phrases, they're practicing language, and this is still an important step, and they're still learning and developing when they're doing this. And then step four, they're starting to produce more complex structures and vocabulary. So these are just important steps to be aware of when you have an EAL student in your classroom, and just to know that not to panic if they go back to a different step because that's a perfectly normal part of the process. This is literacy focus for play-based learning. So when we're playing, these are kind of the things that we're focusing on for all students, not just EAL students. So your oral skills, how to speak and produce language. So when you're playing, you're talking to other students constantly, you're talking to your teacher. That's how you're showing your understanding. You're also practicing listening skills. So you're listening to your teacher, you're listening to your friends and your peers when you're playing with them in all of these imaginary situations. And you're also practicing your communication skills. So this combines your oral and listening skills and the ability to understand what someone is saying and to be able to provide a response. So this is something that all students participate in a play-based classroom. So play-based learning is the center of all learning outcomes in kindergarten and creates learning opportunities that all students can benefit from. Research has demonstrated that play enables children to make sense of their world, expand social and cultural understandings, express personal thoughts and feelings, practice flexible and divergent thinking, encounter and solve real problems, and learn to consider other people's perspectives. So in kindergarten, it's assessed differently. They don't have your typical report card. They have outcomes, but they are achieved through playing. So for example, if you have a science unit and your science outcomes revolve around habitats or revolve around animals, you're not just going to teach a unit on that. You're going to create play centers and different activities that are going to help them achieve that through that. And you're also going to demonstrate their learning through a kindergarten portfolio rather than your typical report card. So it is quite a bit different than all of the other grades. This is part of kind of how play works. So there's two kinds of play. There's free play and there's guided play. So these are kind of the skills and that students are working on during this time. So they're making sense of the world. They're making sense of the environment around them, the language, their surroundings, everything around them. They're using their imagination and curiosity to engage in learning. They're practicing and experimenting with language freely and without fear of making mistakes. And they're building relationships with peers and adults. So these are kind of things that should be focused on in a play-based classroom for EAL students. These are kinds of the things that they are focusing on. Okay, so this is just a video that kind of talks about different strategies that you can use in your classroom and different play-based activities that can be used. So you're going to watch about 5 to 7 minutes of this video, and then we are going to continue on with the presentation.
Play-based learning is the intentional use of engaging students actively in their learning experience. It's a deeper learning experience for children in which they are actively engaged and also starting to make meaning of ideas.
There are particular things we want kids to learn, and yet we want it to be playful and interesting and involving. Those, to a lot of teachers, I think, seem like they're going in totally different directions, and I don't think that's the case at all.
We know play-based learning actually encourages children's spatial and mathematical capacities as well as their early literacy skills, such as the ability to tell stories in a logical fashion. We also know that it's a key element in building executive functioning skills or self-regulation and being able to monitor their own behavior and engage with their peers in a meaningful way, and having teachers model that for them and support that, scaffold that engagement is really helpful in pushing that brain development.
Your standards and your student outcomes are at the forefront of any lesson design, and you can achieve that without worksheets. You can achieve that through play-based instruction.
A play-based approach overall needs to have a strong emphasis in social skills as well. That requires a child to know how to share, know communication skills, make eye contact when they're connecting with their peers. It's safe. So the safer the learning environment, the bigger the risk the child is willing to take.
Play-based learning really allows teachers to become much more familiar and build stronger, more positive relationships with their students, in that they're engaging them and pulling that experience into the classroom. Once you get past the first few months and you really know your students, you understand their background, that is something that can be built into the connections that you're making.
It is important for kindergartners to have that hand-on activity. It's key for them to feel motivated and excited.
It's important that we recognize that 4- and 5-year-olds don't have the same attention spans, ability to sit for long periods of time, ability to concentrate. You have to plan accordingly, and that might mean something as simple as changing the activity more often. Instead of that 20-minute lesson, maybe it's 4 or 5-minute lessons throughout the day.
Just think as a 5 years old, what you would like to do is you would like to have some fun, some motivated learning experiences, and through the play-based literacy centers, you will provide those.
¿Ya estamos listos? Arriba, Lucas. ¿A cuál voy a lanzar primero? ¿Qué letra? R. ¡Vámonos! Ra, re, ri, ro, ru.
When I plan my lessons, I need to look if I wanted to teach syllables or letter sounds. How am I going to transfer that into something that makes sense?
Excelente. Déjame ver a quién está bien participando, ayudándome.
They feel motivated and they feel fun because the activities need to be prepared for them to feel that, to include that into their learning.
M de quién? De Marcano. Vamos,
We need to make sure that children early on learn letters and start to understand the phonological system of our language. When you're 3 or 4 or 5 and you're at a stage of life where you're learning dozens of new words every single day as you develop from toddlerhood to going off to school, this great explosion of vocabulary that happens with young kids, you're not perceiving the individual sounds as much as you're focused on the words themselves. And so being able to get kids to focus on the sound separate from the meaning.
I for it, it. J for jump, ja.
You try to make it playful, you try to make it about song and language and so on. The research says teaching phonics is effective with young children, and that it not only helps them then, but it continues to be beneficial. It's been measured right through middle school and high school.
So this video was based out of the United States, but I think the information was still relevant and it still applies here in Canada. It focused on play for all students rather than specifically EAL students, but it can be for everyone. And I just want you to kind of think about what was one of your takeaways from the video or something that resonated with you. So like I mentioned earlier, the two types of play are free play and guided play. So the difference here is free play is students kind of have free reign. They can decide what toys they want to play with. They kind of guide their own learning. Whereas guided play, for example, would be if I created a sensory bin with letters in it and I had a specific outcome or goal that I wanted students to achieve. So for this, I would pull students in small groups and I would kind of assess them on whether or not they could complete this. So those are kinds of the differences between those. And these are just different things that are really important for really any classroom, but especially early learning classrooms. So the first step is to make sure that you have a predictable routine because the students know what to expect from their day. It's going to be just a lot easier for them to feel safe in their environment. Another important thing is to encourage first language use. So we want to make sure that students know that you can speak in your first language, you're still learning, and we can learn from you by doing that too. Interact with children when they're using their first language. So if they are speaking in their language, you can still interact with them. You can learn from them. You can learn if they're talking about something specific, you can learn what that word is in their language, and you can still kind of make them feel important through that. It's also important to ensure that students are reflected in their learning and that we guide them to further develop their literacy skills. So these are kind of things that are always in the back of my mind when I am planning for pre-K and kindergarten and when I'm creating different learning opportunities for them. So this was just a quote from the paper that I wrote based on this presentation. Play-based classrooms that are rich in language and diversity and are inclusive of student backgrounds and culture create a foundation for students to build their language and literacy skills. The next part of this presentation talks about the importance of home languages. So bilingualism is an asset. It is important to maintain the children's first or home languages as this has a significant role in shaping identity, language development, and increased cognitive development. So home languages build positive self-concept and well-being. So the maintenance of first language helps the child develop a positive self-concept and overall well-being. It helps them develop meaningful relationships. So language helps students to maintain and develop relationships with others through oral communication, and it also helps them have a sense of identity and belonging. Language is closely tied to identity. Students need this to feel like they belong in their classroom and their environment. This is an important thing to communicate to families because sometimes families, if they're trying to learn English, they are focusing on speaking English and they don't necessarily continue with their home language, which could be very damaging. And so it's important to make sure that families do understand that it is okay and it's great to speak in your home language because your child is still going to develop different kinds of literacy skills, and that is going to translate into any additional language that they learn. To become bilingual, children require two meaningful, supportive, loving, and stimulating environments with significant exposure in each language. So, this is also something really important to consider with the children in our classroom, that we are someone who can provide this environment to them, and that we can provide them with exposure in both of their languages, which is just going to help them thrive and develop their skills. So, next, I'm just going to go through a little activity. So oftentimes when playing, students will use their home language to express themselves. So now we're just going to watch this short little video that talks about how you can teach the whole child through guided play.
In play, there's more learning that we can even see or measure through any of our traditional ways, but you would have at least as much learning in play as you do in completing a worksheet. It would be much more complex learning. It would be integrated learning, so it's not just math or reading, it's all of that. It includes writing. When our students are playing grocery store, you're including concepts of math. You're writing store lists. You're doing role play by who is the cashier. You're teaching language. Our dual language students and all of our students can build their language skills, their oracy, through play much more effectively than any other method, quite honestly.
We've visited other school districts that have been doing this same type of thing longer, and they said that the teachers that were maybe in first grade or second grade, whatever grade they were headed to, were worried that the students wouldn't be at the level that they were expecting, and every time they have exceeded their expectations.
One of the biggest misconceptions about play in the classroom is that it is a free-for-all. It is absolutely not a free-for-all. The level of planning that goes into designing an environment that's conducive to play is far greater than planning for teacher-directed activity.
So as I go through this activity, these are kind of the sections that I'm going to discuss with you. So the first one is understanding student needs, creating language goals, creating play center focused on that specific goal, and the observations. So we're just going to kind of go through that, and I'm going to show you how you can develop a play-based learning opportunity for EAL students. So for this particular student, this is just a student that I made up. So it's not a real student that I've taught. I just kind of made someone so that we can go through and you can see how I would go through this process for an EAL student in my classroom. So based on the Saskatchewan Guide to Using the Common Framework of Reference, Leela is at an A1.1 in spoken interaction, which is going to be our focus for this activity. So I chose just one goal because it just makes it a lot easier to see if you've achieved the goal. If you kind of put too many into one, it can be a lot more challenging to know if that goal has been achieved. So I started with listing some of Leela's strengths. So she can provide her name and can name a few of her friends. She can express a lack of understanding. She can ask for something using both words and gestures. She can express how she is feeling using simple standard expressions. And she can understand and respond in a pattern about familiar things. And she can talk about her name, her age, and that kind of thing. For her background, Leela is 4 years old and has been in school for 3 months. Her family moved to Canada from Syria 1 year ago, and she lives with her mother, her father, and her 3 older sisters. Some of her interests are she loves drawing, painting, and playing with the sensory bin. She plays dress up regularly, loves animals, and enjoys being around and interacting with her friends. So this is the information that I use to kind of create a play opportunity for her. So her language goals are Leela will be able to use some basic language structures learned in class, such as I live or I am. She will be able to respond to clear, simple questions about familiar things such as her name, age, and birthplace using a learned language pattern. Leela will be able to ask for something by pointing and using gestures. And in a few slides, I'm just going to go through an observation sheet. So On this observation sheet, the teacher will record Leela's success throughout the week. She will add this along with pictures to her portfolio to document her learning and growth. And she will focus on specific vocabulary words and language goals and will help Leela achieve this through guided play. So like I mentioned earlier, you report student progress through a kindergarten portfolio. So by having pictures and this observation sheet and kind of doing this every so often, when you do have a meeting with a parent, you can go through and you can show the growth that she made. You can show an activity that she did 2 months ago and how much she's grown since then and different things that she's doing now. And it's just a lot easier to communicate that growth with parents when you have that portfolio and pictures to go along with it. So some questions to ask before you make this play center is what type of exploration center might require students to use their name, place of birth, and age, and would give her an opportunity to practice simple language structures. Would Leela be interested in this? Could this help her meet her language goals? So some possible answers are, some exploration centers that might kind of achieve all of these goals, or you could make a doctor's office, you could make a sensory bin, you could make a vet clinic. So that would kind of allow her, that talks about place of birth, it could talk about age, it could talk about their name, it could use different sentence structures. So this would kind of be a good start and a good way for her to practice these skills. Would Leela be interested in this? Yes, because she loves animals and she loves interacting with others. Could this help her meet her language goals? Yes, because there's lots of language and interaction that could take place in this exploration center. So here I just have some different pictures that the play center could look like. So for a doctor's office, you could have different x-rays, you would have a little sheet for her to fill out. So, and again, she wouldn't just be playing this by herself, she would have her friends playing with her too. So she could be the nurse, she could be the doctor, she could be the receptionist, she could be the patient. Or often they all take turns doing those things. So there's just all kinds of language that could take place when she's doing this. Like if they were looking at these x-rays and they could have different discussions about that. If they were filling out the sheet, they could be talking about eyes and ears, and she could be talking about that in her home language, and she could be also talking about that in English. So there's all kinds of different language opportunities that could happen here. This is just a little example of the observation sheet that you could use. So you would just kind of say where she was playing, what her name is. You would write down her language goals, any observations that you had as you were watching and contributing to this and kind of guiding play. And I always like to use strengths and touch points. So strengths, anything that she's doing really well at. Touch points, if you see there's like a common language error that she's making or something that you think that could be worked on, that you would jot this down and then you would kind of use those touch points to guide your next play center. So this is kind of just a good way to review, and it also helps you plan for further learning. So next we're going to talk about the teacher role in supporting EAL students. So the research shows that the teacher plays a huge role in the literacy and language development of EAL students. So it's important to establish a predictable routine and expectation. So this again is important for all students. So for an example of something that you could model is every day you could greet them upon arrival. That way the student knows every single day when they get to school, you're going to be there at the door greeting them when they come in. That's just a safe thing that they know is going to happen when they get to school. You could use routine language to assist in choosing activities. You could use simple English to help students understand routines and expectations. So for example, if you are like talking about transitioning to different things. So if you're at the carpet and you're having circle time and then you're transitioning to playtime, you're going to make sure that you're using simple language so that students know that that transition is happening and you're not using really wordy, complex sentences that are difficult for them to understand. It's also important to model language for learners and to use repetition. So anytime that you are establishing a routine and expectation, you need to be very repetitive to make sure that students know what this routine is. So why is this important? Establishing routines allows students to predict what is coming next and gain a sense of comfortability with their classroom environment. Teachers must implement thoughtful routines to ensure EAL students feel safe, comfortable, and supported, and it also helps students to develop secure and trusting relationships with their teachers. This is especially important, like if you have refugee students in your classroom or any student who has experienced any sort of trauma in their life, it can be very difficult for them to develop these secure and trusting relationships, and it can be a really big job. So it's really important to really focus on the environment and in building those relationships with those students. So for supporting EAL students, students need explicit modeling and language teaching. And again, you're going to have to be very repetitive with this, and you're going to just have to make sure that you're always modeling the language. EAL students need teachers who understand the stages of second language acquisition and how children learn. So like I kind of talked about before, how just because they're at the silent stage doesn't mean that they're going to stay there, and it doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to move to the next stage. They might go backwards, and that they're going to kind of be moving throughout these stages, and it's important to understand that. Listening. Children need adults who listen to them and make them feel heard and important. Teachers can guide oral development by listening attentively to and observing children's responses and interactions, by providing models of richer responses, and by introducing new vocabulary. And students also need their teacher to scaffold oral language as they engage in conversation. So these are just some different ways that we can support the EAL students in our classroom. Some other things that early childhood professionals need to do are they need to respect and support the home languages of children. They need to ensure that children's cultural backgrounds are incorporated into the program and base their planning on current knowledge of language development. So it's also important to make sure that you are staying up to date and current with language development and kind of knowing where your students are at. It's also important to create an environment which supports natural language learning, and that we closely observe children talking in a variety of situations to find out and how to assess their skills in using their language. And we also need to establish a supportive environment which affirms children's rights to use languages other than English, and to understand and appreciate the home literacy environments, and to assist parents to understand the value of a strong first or home language. So again, it's important that families understand the value of developing their first language, and so that they continue to practice and develop that at home, so that that translates into all the languages that they use. Okay, the next part of my presentation goes over cultural awareness and supporting EAL students in developing language skills. So effective teaching ensures that every student in the classroom community knows that their home language is valued and their multilingualism ability is an advantage, even as it is developing. It is important that we include families in our classrooms, make an effort to bring cultures into learning centers, and that we find ways to incorporate home languages into learning. So in pre-kindergarten, there are monthly family events. So this is kind of one way that you can make sure that cultures are represented and that everybody feels welcomed into your classroom. Children enter kindergarten with a wide variety of skills and languages and bring a unique perspective into the classroom that should be celebrated and appreciated. In addition to their emergent classroom language, immigrant children live and know another language, one that forms their identity and connects them to family, culture, and country of origin and religion. Therefore, they have dual language and literacy needs and require concrete support and guidance in learning both the home language and their classroom language. Each early learning program must demonstrate an understanding and respond to children's wide range of strengths, cultures, and linguistic abilities. So now we're just going to kind of watch a short video on building a belonging classroom and just showing how we can make those connections and how we can bring cultural awareness into the classroom.
Anything else special happened this weekend, friends?
In the pool, I did a cannonball. I know how to swim.
You know this one?
I know I do. Blow bubbles underwater.
You
Me
do?
too.
As human beings, one of the most essential needs we have is the need to belong. In school, children need a sense of belonging to be able to be productive learners. They need to be connected to their fellow students, connected to their teachers, to also be affirmed in who they are in a way that is positive and accepting.
I don't take swimming lessons.
In a belonging classroom, there's a community being explicitly built. The teacher knows each child and things about each of those children that they can mention and draw on.
I pay attention, I listen. I'm really invested in what they tell me. The students feeling loved, students feeling nurtured, students feeling like they have a place at school, they're safe. It activates their brain cells. What side were you on?
Sense of belonging is one of the most important activators of a child's engagement in learning. Everything about activating a child's cognitive skills begins with activating their social connectedness. The energy for learning is coming from the social connection that children have.
But in the end, we're trying to come up with an agreement.
Excellent.
We're not going to comment, question. We're only going to encourage. Because they're culturally and linguistically diverse students, I want to really make sure that we are making them feel connections. All the writing we do in our class, it's very much about them. It helps and promotes them to find their own voice and to share their stories.
Sometimes people think every Muslim person is a target or is a terrorist.
Thank you, Anissa.
What did this show us about what we are good at as a group?
Working together, because we often argue a lot.
Today, we did an activity that was really designed to get them thinking about how they're going to support each other. I think that reiterating the idea that we're in this together, I think it's hard to find the time, but doing some team building exercises at the beginning of the year and revisiting them can really help illustrate that point.
In a belonging classroom, they have a community that may meet in classroom meetings to problem solve together, to read stories together, to tell successes and accomplishments or important events together. They celebrate like families do, things that each other have done or have experienced.
Let's talk about what we admire about some of our friends.
I admire Jazara because she is so compassionate.
And when we're talking about being compassionate and being supportive of one another, it's to build that deeper connection for everyone, just to feel like this is their school family, this is somewhere they're loved, they're nurtured, they're taken care of, they're valued.
Thank you for speaking.
The community becomes a place where you can bring your emotions, your fears, your needs. You can be honest about what's going on and know that there will be acceptance, support, and love that's available to carry you through.
We all can work together and we all can try to strategize together and create a better pathway for others to be successful. And we can make it fun.
They're working together. They take care of each other, not just personally, but academically.
We're always pushing each other.
Play-based learning that builds literacy and language supports and broadens cultural understanding within the classroom can strengthen and support language and literacy skills for EAL students. So as I leave you, I just want you to think about these reflective questions. So what did you learn from this presentation? Did you gain an understanding of what the role of the teacher is in the primary classrooms? Did you learn about how play-based learning can support and develop language and literacy skills in the classroom? Did the activity help you to see how to create a play and exploration center focused on student interest and language needs? And this was just a little handout that I made that kind of summarizes just the entire presentation and the different sections within. And I think that is everything. So thank you so much for listening to my presentation.